He covers the muffled cries of the twins in the pit with dirt. The silence of the forest is broken by the whinny of a white horse watching from the top of the hill. But before we continue, if you love animals as much as we do, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a heartfelt story. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The summer storm lashed against the windows of Thornfield Estate as Ethan Caldwell stood in his father's study, fingers tracing the ornate carvings of the mahogany desk. Lightning illuminated the portraits of Caldwell patriarchs that lined the walls. Stern-faced men in expensive suits whose blood flowed through his veins, yet remained strangers to him. 3 weeks since his father's funeral, and the weight of inheritance still felt foreign on his shoulders. "Mr. Caldwell?" Mrs. Patterson, the estate manager, appeared at the doorway. "The lawyers have arrived with the final paperwork." At 32, Ethan was now the sole heir to the Caldwell fortune, 15,000 acres of Kentucky's finest horse country, investments worth more than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and a name that opened doors throughout the bluegrass. "State," he nodded, adjusting his tie. "Send them in and bring some of that bourbon my father kept for special occasions." Hours later, after signatures and handshakes and congratulations on a legacy he hadn't earned, Ethan found himself alone in the cavernous library. Rain continued to drum against the windows as he pulled down leather-bound records of the Caldwell family businesses. Something about becoming the third-generation custodian of such wealth left him hollow. Perhaps in these ledgers and documents he might find purpose, a reason for the unshakable emptiness that had followed him since childhood. As midnight approached, Ethan reached for a weathered ledger on the highest shelf. When he pulled it down, a small brass key tumbled out, landing with a distinctive ping on the hardwood floor. He picked it up, turning it over in his palm. Too small for any door, but perfect for... His eyes drifted to his father's antique chest in the corner. For as long as Ethan could remember, that chest had remained locked, its contents a mystery. His father had always changed the subject whenever Ethan asked about it. The key slid into the lock with a perfect fit. Inside lay neatly organized files, old photographs, letters, and documents yellowed with age. Ethan began carefully sorting through them, finding nothing extraordinary until he reached the false bottom. His fingers detected the slight difference in depth, and when he pressed against the corner, a hidden compartment revealed itself. Inside lay a single envelope, the paper brittle with age. Carefully, he extracted a handwritten letter dated May 15th, 1992, almost exactly 33 years ago. "To whoever finds this truth," it began in a delicate hand, "I can no longer bear the weight of silence. On the night of April 10th, 1992, during the worst storm in 20 years, 2 perfect babies were born to Eleanor Caldwell. 2 identical boys, not one as the record states. One was kept and raised as Ethan James Caldwell. The other was taken away before dawn. The family claimed one child had died, but I know the truth. Both lived, both breathed. One was buried in paperwork and privilege, the other buried in silence, but still breathing somewhere in this world. God forgive the Caldwells for what they've done to protect their precious inheritance laws. If you seek answers, go to the clearing beyond the twisted pines. Take a shovel. Take courage. Martha Winters, former head nurse to the Caldwell family." Ethan read the words 3 times, his hands trembling more with each pass. A brother, a twin, impossible. Yet the letter's details, the date matching his birthday, the mention of the historic storm often recounted in family stories, the signature of the nurse he vaguely remembered from childhood photographs, all aligned with what he knew. No wonder family photo albums only began when he was 5. No wonder his mother had suffered from melancholia until her death when he was 12. No wonder his father never answered questions about his birth. Dawn found Ethan still in the library, surrounded by birth records, old newspapers, and family photographs. Nothing confirmed the nurse's wild claim, but nothing disproved it either. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. From the library window, he could see across the manicured lawns to the distant line of trees that marked the property's eastern boundary. Beyond those trees lay the older, abandoned parts of the Caldwell land, overgrown and largely forgotten. The Twisted Pines. That afternoon, Ethan drove his Jeep as far as the old service road would take him, then continued on foot. No one came to this part of the property anymore. His father had forbidden it, claiming unstable ground and dangerous wildlife. The forest grew, dense around him, the spring leaves creating a green cathedral overhead. After 20 minutes of pushing through underbrush, the Twisted Pines appeared. Ancient trees bent into unnatural shapes by some long-forgotten storm. Just beyond them, exactly as Martha's letter had described, lay a small clearing. The air felt different here, heavier, as if the atmosphere itself carried memories. Ethan set down his backpack and extracted the shovel he'd brought. Where to begin? The clearing was perhaps 30 feet across, covered in wildflowers and tall grass. For hours, he dug shallow holes across the clearing, finding nothing but rocks and roots. The sun began to sink lower, golden light filtering through the trees. Exhausted and frustrated, Ethan sat on a fallen log, wondering if he'd been a fool to believe a decades-old letter from a disgruntled employee. Then he heard it, a soft whicker, followed by the sound of hooves on damp earth. At the edge of the clearing stood a horse, a magnificent bay stallion with intelligent eyes. Ethan froze. This wasn't one of the Thornfield thoroughbreds. This was a wild thing, muscular and free. For a moment, horse and man regarded each other across the clearing. The stallion's ears flicked forward with curious attention. "Hello there," Ethan said softly, rising slowly. The horse didn't bolt. Instead, it took 3 deliberate steps into the clearing, then stopped, its gaze fixed on a spot several yards to Ethan's right. When Ethan didn't move, the horse stamped one hoof, then stared again at the same spot. Curious, Ethan moved toward the area that seemed to hold the animal's attention. The horse remained still, watching. Ethan began to dig again, the shovel, cutting deeper into the earth here than his previous attempts. After about 2 feet, the metal struck something solid but yielding. Dropping to his knees, Ethan used his hands to clear away the remaining dirt. A small wooden box emerged, its surface weathered but intact. His fingers trembled as he lifted it from the earth. When he glanced up, the horse was still there, its dark eyes reflecting the setting sun. Inside the box, wrapped in moisture-resistant cloth, lay 2 hand-sewn dolls, simple things made of cotton and stuffed with what felt like dried beans. Each wore a tiny hand-stitched gown, identical except for the color, one blue, one green. Attached to each doll was a small tag. The first read simply, Ethan. The second bore a name he'd never heard, Elijah. Between the dolls lay a necklace, a simple leather cord with hand-carved wooden beads. It had been deliberately broken in the middle, the severed ends placed with one doll each, as if symbolizing a connection violently severed. The breath left Ethan's lungs as the truth settled into his bones. This was no metaphor, no symbolic. A burial. These were totems created to represent real children, him and a brother he'd never known existed. The nurse hadn't buried children. She'd buried the evidence of their separation in this forgotten place, a silent protest against a terrible injustice. When Ethan looked up again, the horse was gone, vanished as silently as it had appeared. But something had changed. The hollow feeling that had haunted him his entire life suddenly had a shape, a name, a reason. Somewhere in this world, he had a brother, a twin, someone who shared his face, his blood, his birthday, someone who might not know they were missing half of themselves. As darkness fell over the clearing, Ethan carefully repacked the box with its precious contents. Tomorrow, he would begin searching for answers in earnest. Someone in the town would Remember, someone would know what happened to a baby named Elijah, born to wealth but spirited away in the night. The path back through the woods seemed clearer somehow, as if the forest itself had shifted to guide his way. As Thornfield's lights came into view, Ethan saw movement at the edge of the tree line. The bay stallion stood watching, its silhouette dark against the twilight sky. Their eyes met across the distance, and Ethan felt a strange certainty. The horse would return, and somehow it would lead him to answers. 3 days passed in a blur of sleepless research. Ethan converted the study into an investigation room, with maps of Kentucky spread across the mahogany desk and 33-year-old local newspapers scattered on every surface. The box from the clearing sat at the center of it all, the two dolls now resting side by side, their broken necklace between them. Mrs. Patterson had noticed the change in him, but asked no questions, a skill perfected through decades of service to the secretive Caldwell family. She merely ensured fresh coffee appeared at regular intervals and deflected the calls from business associates that Ethan now ignored. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, pausing at the doorway. Ethan looked up from a birth announcement in the Lexington Herald-Leader dated April 12, 1992. It mentioned only one Caldwell heir, with no hint of twins. "Actually, yes. Did you know Martha Winters? She was a nurse here when I was born." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted subtly. "I did, though not well. She left the family's employment rather suddenly when you were very young. Do you know where she went?" "I believe she moved out west, Oregon or Washington. Your father made it clear her name wasn't to be mentioned again." She hesitated. "May I ask why you're interested in ancient history, sir?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "I'm trying to understand more about my birth, medical history, that sort of thing." She nodded, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to press further. "Old Dr. Lambert delivered you. He retired about 15 years ago but still lives in town. If it's medical history you're after, he might be your best source." An hour later, Ethan found himself on the porch of a modest Victorian home in Lexington. Dr. Samuel Lambert answered the door himself, a thin man in his 80s with alert eyes behind thick glasses. "Young Caldwell," he said, recognition immediate. "Never thought I'd see you at my door. Come in, come in." The doctor's home smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. He led Ethan to a sunroom overlooking a small garden where they sat surrounded by potted ferns and medical journals. "What brings the Lord of Thornfield to visit an old country doctor?" Lambert asked, his tone light but his eyes shrewd. Ethan went straight to the point. "I need to know about the night I was born." Lambert's expression didn't change, but he reached for his pipe, a deliberate motion that bought him time. "That was a long time ago, son. April 10th, 1992. The big storm. You delivered me at Thornfield rather than the hospital because the roads were flooded." Ethan leaned forward. "But you didn't deliver just me, did you?" The pipe remained unlit in the doctor's hands. "Who's been telling tales?" "Martha Winters left a letter. I found it after my father died." Lambert sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 80-plus years. "That woman, she never could make peace with it." He struck a match, lit his pipe and took a long draw before continuing. "Your mother went into labor early, 8 weeks before her due date. The storm was catastrophic. Roads washed out, power, lines down. We couldn't get her to the hospital, so I came to Thornfield with what equipment I could carry. And she had twins," Ethan said flatly. Lambert's silence was confirmation enough. Identical boys, born 7 minutes apart, both healthy despite being premature. The doctor finally nodded. "Your father had me record only one birth. The other child was taken by your Uncle Robert before dawn." "Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. The Caldwell Trust was explicit. In the case of male twins, the estate would be divided equally. Your father wasn't willing to split the inheritance that had been consolidated over generations. Lambert's eyes took on a faraway look. He convinced himself he was doing what was best for the family legacy. And my uncle? He took his own nephew. And did what? Gave him away? Robert disagreed with your father's decision but was overruled. Rather than allow the child to be sent to some anonymous adoption agency, he arranged a private placement. A good family, he assured us. People who desperately wanted a child and would never speak of where he came from. Who? Where? Ethan demanded. Lambert shook his head. I wasn't privy to those details. Your uncle handled everything, and he passed away 10 years ago. Martha might have known more. She assisted with the birth and cared for both babies during those few hours before the second one was taken away. That's why your father dismissed her later, I suspect. She knew too much and couldn't hide her contempt. Ethan sat back, trying to process the confirmation of his worst suspicions. My mother, did she agree to this? Eleanor had complications after delivery. She was unconscious when the decision was made. The doctor's voice softened. When she recovered and was told one baby hadn't survived, she fell into a deep depression. I believe on some level she knew the truth, but couldn't face it. Ethan thought of his quiet, sad mother who rarely smiled and spent hours staring out windows. How much of her melancholy had been grief for a child she was told had died? How much had been the subconscious knowledge of a betrayal too terrible to acknowledge? Is there anyone else who might know where my brother was taken? Lambert considered this. Old man Harlan might. He drove for your family back then, took your uncle and the baby wherever they went that night. Last I heard, he was still living, in that cabin by Willow Creek. As Ethan stood to leave, Lambert caught his arm. Son, some secrets stay buried for a reason. The Caldwells have influence in this country that goes back generations. If your father went to such lengths, I need to know, Ethan said simply. He's my twin. Lambert nodded, resignation in his eyes. The Harlan place is off Route 29, about 12 miles east of your property. Can't miss it. Blue roof, lot of junked cars in the yard. The drive to Willow Creek took Ethan through rolling countryside, blanketed with bluegrass and dotted with thoroughbred farms. Kentucky in spring was postcard perfect. But today, the beauty was lost on him. His mind raced with questions, with anger, with a growing sense of urgency. 33 years stolen from both of them. Harlan's property was exactly as Lambert had described, a small cabin with peeling blue paint on the roof, surrounded by automotive carcasses in various states of disassembly. As Ethan pulled up, an elderly black man looked up from the engine he was tinkering with, wiping his hands on a rag. Well now, the man said, eyes narrowing, you're Howard Caldwell's boy, spitting image of him at your age. Mr. Harlan? Ethan extended his hand. I'm Ethan Caldwell, Isaiah Harlan. His handshake was firm despite his years. What brings you to my humble establishment? Don't imagine your Bentley needs parts from my collection. I came about something that happened a long time ago, the night I was born. Harlan's expression closed like a shutter. Don't know nothing about that night, except it stormed something fierce, lost 3 oak trees on my property. Dr. Lambert said you drove my uncle somewhere that night, with a baby. The old man turned back to his engine. Doc's getting senile. I was just the driver back then, didn't ask questions. Mr. Harlan, please, that baby was my twin brother. Harlan's hands stilled on the carburetor. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant call of a whippoorwill. Finally, he straightened up. Come inside, this ain't a conversation for the yard. The cabin's interior was unexpectedly neat and clean. Harlan gestured Ethan to a worn armchair while he lowered himself onto a sofa with a soft groan. Your uncle was a good man in a bad situation, he began without preamble. He fought your father on it, but Howard was set on keeping the estate intact. When he realized he couldn't change Howard's mind, he made sure the boy went somewhere decent. Where? Ethan leaned forward. Where did you take them? Little town, called Willow Bend, other side of Bourbon County. Horse country, but not fancy like Lexington. Working farms mostly. Harlan reached for a leather-bound Bible on the side table and extracted a folded piece of paper. Your uncle gave me this the day before he died. Said if anyone ever came asking, I should share it. He handed the paper to Ethan. It's the name of the family who took the boy. That's all I know. Ethan unfolded the paper. Written in a firm hand was a single line. Jackson and Marie Sullivan, Willow Bend, KY. The Sullivans, Ethan repeated. Did you see them that night? Harlan nodded slowly. Simple folks. Had a small horse rescue operation. Couldn't have children of their own. Your uncle had done business with Jackson before. They trained horses or some such. He knew they were good people, desperate for a child. Do you know if they're still there in Willow Bend? Last I heard, old man Sullivan passed some years back. The missus too, not long after. Can't say about the boy. Ethan carefully folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Thank you, Mr. Harlan. You have no idea what this means. I think I do, the old man replied. Some things ain't right to keep apart. Not ever. As Ethan drove away, the setting sun cast long shadows across the Kentucky countryside. His GPS indicated Willow Bend was less than 90 minutes away. He could be there before full dark. But what then? Knock on doors asking about a family long gone. Look for a man who wouldn't recognize his own name. At the crossroads where he should have turned toward Willow Bend, Ethan instead found himself heading back to Thornfield. He needed time to think, to plan his approach. As he neared the estate, a movement at the edge of the woods caught his eye. The bay stallion stood at the tree line, visible in his headlights for just a moment before vanishing into the forest. Acting on impulse, Ethan pulled over and followed on foot. The horse reappeared ahead of him, moving slowly but purposefully deeper into the woods. I'm coming, Ethan called softly. Show me where to go. For nearly an hour, he followed the horse through increasingly unfamiliar territory. They crossed a small stream and climbed a gentle rise until finally emerging on the far side of the property, where the Caldwell land bordered a neighboring farm. In the moonlight, Ethan could make out a modestly sized farmhouse in the distance, its lights glowing warmly. Several outbuildings surrounded it, and a sign at the end of the driveway read, Second Chance Ranch, Horse Rehabilitation and Therapy. The stallion stopped at the property line, watching Ethan intently. Is this it? Ethan whispered. Is he here? As if in answer, the horse turned and trotted along the fence line until reaching a gate. There it stopped again, looking back at Ethan expectantly. Heart pounding, Ethan approached the gate. A pickup truck was parked in the farmyard. A man moved between the barn and the house, carrying what looked like feed buckets. Even at this distance, even in the dim light, something about his movements was hauntingly familiar. The stallion whickered softly, then without warning, leapt the fence in a single powerful motion and cantered toward the man in the yard. Midnight, the man called, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. Where have you been, old friend? Ethan froze, his hand on the gate. The man's face was now visible in the porch light as he greeted the horse with easy familiarity. It was like looking in a mirror. The same jawline, the same profile, the same way of tilting his head slightly to the right. Elijah, his twin, his brother, separated by greed and family politics, but somehow against all odds, living on neighboring land. The horse, Midnight, turned to look back at Ethan, then nudged the man, directing his attention toward the gate. Hello? The man called, squinting into the darkness. Someone there? Ethan's mouth went dry. What could he possibly say? How do you introduce yourself to the twin brother who was stolen from you before you even knew he existed? But as he stepped into the light, Words became unnecessary. The man, at the porch, stilled, bucket dropping from suddenly limp fingers, his expression a perfect reflection of Ethan's own shock. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across 33 years of separation. Then, as if pulled by an invisible thread, both began moving forward. "Who are you?" The man's voice was hoarse, his eyes wide as he took another step forward. The horse, Midnight, stood between them, head turning from one identical face to the other. Ethan swallowed hard. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I think we're brothers." The man shook his head slowly, not in denial but in disbelief. "That's not possible. I'm Eli Sullivan. I don't have any brothers." Eli, not Elijah, but close enough. The name on the doll had survived in some form. "I didn't think I did either," Ethan said quietly, "until a few days ago." They stood in silence, measuring each other. Same height, same build, same dark hair and green eyes. Even their expressions mirrored each other, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning recognition. "You'd better come inside," Eli finally said, gesturing toward the farmhouse. He turned to the horse. "Go on to the paddock, Midnight. I'll bring you an apple later." The stallion lingered a moment longer, its intelligent eyes moving between the two men before trotting off toward an enclosure where several other horses grazed. "You know that horse?" Ethan asked as they walked toward the house. "Midnight? He's been showing up here for years, wild as they come, but gentle with the rescue horses. Never let me catch him properly, but he comes and goes as he pleases." Eli glanced sideways at Ethan. "You've seen him before. He led me to find something important, and then he led me here, to you." Eli's farmhouse was modest but comfortable. Wooden, floors, simple furniture, and walls decorated with photographs of horses. In the kitchen, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and motioned for Ethan to sit at a worn oak table. "Start from the beginning," Eli said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Ethan told him everything. The letter from Martha Winters, the clearing with the buried dolls, the conversations with Dr. Lambert and Isaiah Harlan. As he spoke, he placed the box containing the dolls on the table between them. Eli listened without interruption, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Ethan finished, he reached for the doll with his name tag, turning it over in his calloused hands. "My mother, Marie. She used to tell me I was their miracle," he said finally. "They tried for years to have children, then I arrived like a gift delivered by angels. I never questioned it. Why would I?" He looked up, eyes suddenly hard. "But you're telling me I was stolen, given away like some unwanted puppy." "Not unwanted," Ethan said quickly. "Hidden, separated to protect an inheritance." He rubbed his face wearily. "Our father, he made a terrible choice. Our Uncle Robert tried to make the best of it by finding you a good home." "The Sullivans were good people," Eli acknowledged, his voice softening. "The best. Dad taught me everything about horses. Said I had a natural gift for understanding them. Mom made sure I got an education, even when money was tight." His eyes grew distant. They never had much, but there was always enough love to go around. "Tell me about them," Ethan said. "Tell me about growing up here." For the next hour, Eli shared stories of his childhood on Second Chance Ranch, how Jackson Sullivan started with 2 abused horses and a dream of giving them a fresh start, how the operation gradually expanded into a therapy center for troubled kids and veterans, how Marie made the best apple pie in 3 counties and sang hymns while she worked in the garden. "They passed within a year of each other," Eli said, refilling their glasses. "Dad's heart gave out 7 years ago. Mom followed not long after. Cancer. The doctor said it was quick, but it didn't seem that way to me." He gestured around. "Left me the ranch and enough insurance to keep it running. I've expanded the therapy program since then. I'm sorry I never got to meet them." Ethan said sincerely. What about you? What was life like at... Eli hesitated. Thornfield. Our family estate. Ethan couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. 15,000 acres of Kentucky's finest land, thoroughbreds worth millions, old money, older secrets. Our mother was fragile, depressed. Now I understand why. Our father was distant, all business, no warmth. I was raised more by staff than parents. Sounds lonely. It was. Mother died when I was 12. Father sent me to boarding school after that, then expected me to take over the family businesses. I did everything he asked, earned all the right degrees, learned all the right skills, but it never felt... Ethan struggled to find the words. Real? Eli offered. Exactly, like I was playing a part in someone else's story. Ethan leaned forward. I always felt something was missing. Now I know who it was. Midnight's soft wicker drew their attention to the window. The stallion stood in the yard, silvery in the moonlight. He's an unusual horse, Eli said, watching the animal. Shows up when he's needed most. During the big flood 3 years ago, he appeared at the barn and started making a racket. Woke me up just in time to move the rescue horses to higher ground before the creek overflowed. He smiled faintly. Dad always said some horses have old souls. Midnight's one of them. He led me to the clearing where the dolls were buried, Ethan said, and then to your gate tonight. Maybe he knows something we don't, Eli replied, only half joking. He turned back to Ethan, his expression growing serious. What happens now? You found me, mystery solved. Do you go back to your mansion and your millions, and I stay here with my rescue horses? The question hung in the air between them. What did happen now? Ethan hadn't thought beyond finding his brother. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I don't want to lose you again. Eli nodded slowly. It's late. You're welcome to the spare room. Maybe things will be clearer in the morning. Ethan slept fitfully in Eli's guest room, waking to unfamiliar sounds, roosters crowing, horses nickering, the distant rumble of a tractor. The smell of coffee and bacon drew him to the kitchen, where he found Eli already dressed in work clothes. Hope. You don't mind simple food, Eli said, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon across the table. Nothing fancy here? It's perfect, Ethan assured him, realizing he was genuinely hungry for the first time in days. After breakfast, Eli gave him a tour of Second Chance Ranch. 8 horses currently resided in the rehabilitation program, former racehorses with injuries, neglected animals seized from abusive owners, and 1 elderly pony saved from slaughter. Most will be adopted eventually, Eli explained as they walked through the clean, well-maintained barn. A few will stay here permanently, too damaged, physically or emotionally, to be rehomed. In the largest stall, a chestnut mare with a twisted back leg dozed in the morning sun. She lifted her head as they approached, ears pricking forward with interest. This is Penny, Eli said, his voice softening. Former show jumper. Owner had her nerves blocked so she'd keep competing on an injured leg. By the time we got her, the damage was permanent. He reached over the stall door to stroke her velvet nose. But she's found a new purpose, best therapy horse we've got, especially with the younger kids. As they continued the tour, Ethan was struck by the calm efficiency with which Eli ran. The operation. Each horse had a specialized care plan. The therapy arena was set up with various obstacles and activities designed for different needs. A whiteboard in the office listed upcoming appointments with veterans, at-risk youth, and children with disabilities. You've built something remarkable here, Ethan said, as they watched a volunteer work with one of the horses. Eli shrugged, but pride was evident in his eyes. It's nothing compared to your empire. That's where you're wrong, Ethan replied quietly. This place has purpose, heart. Thornfield has assets. They spent the morning working side by side, Ethan following Eli's lead in feeding, grooming, and exercising the horses. Despite having no experience with farm work, Ethan found himself enjoying the physical labor, the directness of the tasks, the grateful nickering of the horses. "You're not bad at this," Eli observed as Ethan successfully coaxed a skittish gelding into accepting a halter. "Most city folks make too many sudden movements, talk too loud." "Maybe it's in the blood," Ethan suggested. "The Caldwells have raised thoroughbreds for generations. Or maybe Midnight's been giving you lessons on the side," Eli said with a half smile. As if summoned by his name, the bay stallion appeared at the paddock fence, watching them work. He had vanished sometime during the night, but returned now, as if checking on their progress. "Does he ever let you ride him?" Ethan asked. Eli shook his head. "Never tried. Some horses aren't meant to be ridden. They have their own paths to follow." After lunch, Ethan helped Eli prepare for an afternoon therapy session with a group of veterans. As the participants arrived, men and women of various ages, some with visible injuries, others with wounds hidden beneath the surface, Ethan was struck by the transformation in his brother. Eli's quiet confidence expanded, his intuitive understanding of both horses and humans creating a space of trust and healing. One participant, a young woman with a prosthetic leg, struggled to connect with her assigned horse. Eli noticed immediately and guided her toward Penny instead. The mare lowered her head to the woman's level, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. Two beings who had adapted to physical limitations. "They recognize each other," Eli explained softly to Ethan. "The broken places, that's where healing starts." By late afternoon, Ethan reluctantly acknowledged he needed to return to Thornfield. Mrs. Patterson would be worried, and there were business matters he'd been neglecting. "I'd like to come back," he said, as they stood by his jeep. "If that's all right with you." Eli nodded. "I'd like that too. I have 1,000 questions about our mother, about—" He gestured vaguely. "Everything. Tomorrow? I could bring lunch." "Tomorrow works. We've got a busy morning, but come around." 1. As Ethan drove away, he spotted Midnight standing on a rise overlooking both properties, Thornfield Estate to the west, Second Chance Ranch to the east. The stallion's silhouette was sharp against the afternoon sky, a sentinel watching, over two worlds now connected by newly discovered blood. Back at Thornfield, Ethan found Mrs. Patterson in the study, organizing papers with brisk efficiency. "There you are, Mr. Caldwell. The board has called twice about the quarterly meeting, and the Lexington Historical Society needs confirmation about using the East lawns for their summer fundraiser." Ethan barely heard her. His mind was still at Second Chance Ranch, with the brother he'd known for less than 24 hours, yet felt connected to, as if they'd never been separated. "Mrs. Patterson," he interrupted, "did you know my father had the family records altered? That I had a twin brother who was given away at birth?" The housekeeper went very still, papers frozen in midair. "Mr. Caldwell, Please don't deny it. I know the truth now." She set the papers down carefully, her usually composed face troubled. "I suspected. There were whispers, but your father forbade any mention of it. And you obeyed. He was not a man one disobeyed lightly." She straightened her shoulders. "What will you do now?" It was the same question Eli had asked. What now? The answer was beginning to take shape in Ethan's mind, but he needed more information, more time to think it through. "First, I need to see all the family records. Everything about the Caldwell Trust, the inheritance laws, the property deeds, all of it." Mrs. Patterson nodded. "I'll have everything brought to the library, and sir, for what it's worth, I'm glad you found him." Ethan spent the evening immersed in legal documents, trust agreements, and property records. The Caldwell Trust, established in 1897, contained the original twin clause his father had apparently feared, stipulating that in the case of male twins, the estate would be divided equally between them. A rare but not unheard of provision in old Southern families, designed to prevent the kind of bitter feuds that had destroyed other dynasties. But as Ethan dug deeper, he found something his father had either missed or deliberately ignored. A codicil, added in 1932 by his great-grandfather, specified that if the estate were to be divided and later reunited through mutual agreement of the heirs, it would gain a perpetual tax advantage worth millions over generations. His father's short-sighted greed had actually cost the family the very financial benefit he'd been so desperate to preserve. As midnight approached, Ethan was interrupted by a soft tap at the library door. Williams, the elderly groundskeeper, stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Pardon the intrusion, Mr. Caldwell, but there's something you should see. In the south pasture." Curious, Ethan followed the old man outside. The night was clear, stars scattered above like diamond dust on black velvet. Williams led him to a rise overlooking Thornfield's main pasture, where the prized thoroughbreds usually grazed during the day. In the moonlight, a dozen horses moved across the field in an unusual formation. At their center, unmistakable even at this distance, was Midnight. The wild stallion was somehow inside Thornfield's secure fencing, leading the valuable thoroughbreds in what almost looked like a dance. "He's been coming for 3 nights now," William said quietly. "Never seen anything like it." The thoroughbreds should be skittish around a strange stallion, but they follow him like he's some kind of horse messiah. He glanced sideways at Ethan. "Cook says you found your brother, the twin that was sent away." News traveled fast in a house full of staff who had served the family for generations. Ethan simply nodded. "Some things find their way back together," William said, his eyes on the horses below. "Nature has a way of reuniting what belongs together, no matter what humans do to keep it apart." As they watched, Midnight led the thoroughbreds in a circuit of the pasture, then directly to the eastern fence line, the boundary shared with Second Chance Ranch. There the wild stallion reared once, silhouetted against the moon, before leading the valuable horses back to their regular grazing area. A message? A sign? Ethan wasn't sure, but watching the wild stallion move so purposefully between the two properties, he felt the last pieces of a plan falling into place. "Mr. Williams," he said, "how long have you worked for the Caldwells?" 52 years this summer, served your grandfather, your father, and now you. In all that time, what's been your impression of how this land is used? Williams considered the question carefully. "Fine horses, sir, best bloodlines in Kentucky, but..." He hesitated. "Speak freely." "There was a time when Thornfield meant more to the community. Your grandfather ran programs for local children, hosted riding clinics for those who couldn't afford lessons elsewhere. Your father ended all that, said it wasn't profitable." Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Thank you, Williams. I think it's time for Thornfield to remember its heart." As they turned back toward the house, Ethan caught one more glimpse of Midnight, now standing alone on the ridge between the two properties. The stallion's gaze seemed to follow him, watchful and knowing, as if awaiting Ethan's next move. Tomorrow, he would return to Second Chance Ranch with more than lunch. He would bring a proposal, one that might heal more than just the rift between twin brothers. Dawn found Ethan already awake, standing at the window of his father's study, no, his study now, watching the sun rise over the rolling hills of Thornfield. The thoroughbreds grazed peacefully in the distance, no sign of Midnight's nighttime visit except hoofprints leading to and from the eastern boundary. He had slept little, his mind racing with possibilities, with plans, with the weight of generations of wealth and privilege that suddenly seemed both burden and opportunity. The documents he'd discovered lay spread across the desk, along with pages of notes written in his own hand. Mrs. Patterson entered with coffee, taking in his rumpled appearance with a raised eyebrow. "Have you been up all night, Mr. Caldwell?" "Most of it," Ethan admitted, accepting the steaming cup gratefully. "I need to make some calls. First, get me Benjamin Wallace at the foundation." By noon, Ethan had spoken with the family lawyer, the head of the Caldwell Foundation, and 3 of the most influential board members. Each conversation had begun with shock, shifted to resistance, and finally settled into cautious acceptance of his vision. None could deny his legal right to proceed, though several questioned his judgment. "Your father would never have approved," the lawyer had said, his voice tinged with disapproval. "I'm well aware," Ethan had replied. "That's precisely why it's necessary." Now, as he drove towards Second Chance Ranch with lunch from Lexington's best deli and a portfolio of documents, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. The path forward was clear, though convincing Eli might prove challenging. He found his brother in the therapy arena, working with a small group of children. 6 kids ranging from about 8 to 12 years old were being introduced to the horses. Some approached with confidence, others with trepidation. A girl with Down syndrome stood frozen at the edge of the arena, her face a mixture of longing and fear as she watched the other children petting Penny. Eli noticed her hesitation and knelt beside her, his voice too low for Ethan to hear. The girl nodded and Eli took her hand, leading her not to Penny, but to a smaller pony in the corner. The child's face transformed with wonder as the pony gently nuzzled her palm. Ethan waited until the session ended and the children had departed with their parents and teachers before approaching. "You're good with them," he observed, helping Eli put away the grooming tools. "Kids are easier than adults sometimes, more honest." Eli glanced at the portfolio under Ethan's arm. "That doesn't look like lunch." "It's not. It's a proposal." Ethan hesitated. "But maybe we should eat first." They sat at a picnic table behind the barn, unwrapping sandwiches, while Eli's border collie, Scout, watched hopefully for dropped crumbs. "So," Eli said between bites, "what's this proposal? You buying another racehorse investment opportunity?" "Actually, I'm proposing a merger." Ethan slid the portfolio across the table. "Thornfield Estate and Second Chance Ranch. Combined resources, shared mission." Eli stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Look at the documents. I've had lawyers working on it all morning." Ethan tapped the folder. "The Caldwell Trust has a provision. If twin heirs reunite the estate through mutual agreement, certain tax advantages activate. But more importantly, I'm proposing we transform both properties." Warily, Eli opened the folder and began reading. As he processed the contents, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You want to turn Thornfield into a therapeutic riding center and expand Second Chance Ranch across both properties?" He looked up sharply. "Why? You barely know me. This is millions of dollars of assets." "Because it's the right thing to do," Ethan said simply. "Because our father's choice to separate us was wrong on every level, morally, ethically, and as I discovered last night, even financially. This merger doesn't just reunite us as brothers, it corrects a historical injustice. And your shareholders, your board, the Caldwell legacy, are all just constructs that have been suffocating Thornfield and me for generations." Ethan leaned forward. "The legacy that matters is the one we choose to build. Your work here, with these horses, with the people they help, that's real. That's meaningful in a way that stock portfolios and property values can never be." Eli shook his head, overwhelmed. "This is too much. I can't just accept half of a fortune I didn't earn." "You earned it the day you were born, and then had it stolen from you," Ethan countered. "But this isn't about money, or guilt, or reparations. It's about potential. Look at what you've accomplished here with limited resources. Imagine what could be done with Thornfield's land, facilities, and funding behind it." Eli stared at the papers, then out at his modest farm with its weathered buildings and carefully maintained paddocks. "I'd need time to think, to process all of this." "Of course," Ethan agreed. "Take all the time you need. The offer doesn't expire." A soft whicker interrupted them. Midnight stood at the edge of the picnic area, his dark eyes watchful. The stallion had appeared silently, as was his habit, but now he pawed the ground with impatience. "I think he wants us to follow him," Eli said, rising. "He does this sometimes, gets insistent when he wants to show me something." They followed the horse as he led them away from the farmhouse, across a small creek, and up a gentle slope to a hilltop overlooking both properties. From this vantage point, the contrast between Thornfield and Second Chance Ranch was stark. One a manicured showplace of wealth and tradition, the other a humble working farm with signs of wear and careful mending. Yet from here, Ethan could also see how naturally they could flow together. The creek that divided them could become a connecting feature. Thornfield's empty guest houses could house families participating in longer therapy programs. The extensive trail system could link both properties. Midnight stood between them and the hilltop, looking first toward Thornfield, then to Second Chance Ranch before fixing his gaze on the twins. "He's been moving between our properties for years," Eli said wonderingly. "All this time, he's been the connection we didn't know existed." "Maybe he knew something we didn't," Ethan suggested. The stallion snorted, as if in agreement, then trotted a few steps down the hill before looking back expectantly. "I think we're supposed to keep following," Eli said with a half smile. Midnight led them through a stand of ancient oaks, then down into a secluded hollow. At the center stood a small, weathered cabin, its roof partially collapsed, windows long gone, but the stone foundation still solid. "I've never seen this place before," Eli said, approaching. "Cautiously. It must be on the property line," Ethan replied, equally surprised. "Old hunting cabin, maybe." As they explored the abandoned structure, Midnight remained outside, grazing contentedly as if his task was complete. Inside, they found little of interest, until Eli noticed a carving on one of the support beams. "Look at this," he called. Etched into the aged wood were two sets of initials, RC and EW, surrounded by a rough heart. Below was a date, April 10th, 1991, exactly 1 year before the twins were born. "RC," Ethan breathed. "Robert Caldwell, our uncle." "And EW?" Eli asked. "Eleanor. Winters, maybe?" Martha's last name was Winters. Could be a relative. They looked at each other as understanding dawned. "Our uncle and the nurse," Eli said slowly. "They were involved." "It explains why Martha was so invested in what happened to us," Ethan mused. "Why she buried the dolls, left the letter, and why Uncle Robert insisted on finding you a good home instead of allowing an anonymous adoption. This place must have been their meeting spot," Eli added, "right between the properties, hidden from both." As they stepped back outside, the significance of Midnight's guidance struck them both. The horse had led them not just to each other, but now to the physical evidence of the love that had tried to protect them both. "He's not just any horse, is he?" Ethan said quietly. Eli shook his head. "I've always felt he was connected somehow to this land, to its history, to us," Ethan added. As evening approached, they walked back toward Second Chance Ranch, Midnight following at a distance. The setting sun bathed the Kentucky landscape in golden light, softening the boundaries between the two properties. At the creek that marked the property line, they paused. "I need to ask you something," Ethan said. "When did Midnight first appear?" "At your ranch?" Eli thought for a moment. "About 7 years ago, right after Dad passed. Why?" "That's when our father started getting sick. He died 6 months ago." Ethan looked back at the stallion, who stood watching them from a respectful distance. "It's almost as if he was waiting," Eli finished, "for the right time to bring us together." They crossed the creek in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. At the farmhouse, Eli made coffee, while Ethan called Mrs. Patterson to let her know he wouldn't be returning to Thornfield that night. As darkness fell, they sat on the porch, the merger documents set aside for now. Instead, they shared stories, Eli. Of his parents, the horses he'd rehabilitated over the years, the people whose lives had been changed through his work. Ethan, of their mother's quiet sadness, boarding school misadventures, and the hollow feeling that had followed him through life until now. "I have something to show you," Ethan said eventually, reaching for his wallet. He extracted a small, worn photograph, the one he'd found in his father's study. "It's us, the only picture I could find of us together." Eli took it carefully. The faded image showed two infants sleeping side by side, their tiny hands almost touching. Someone had started to tear the photo but stopped, leaving just the edge damaged. "We were real," Eli whispered. "Together." "We still are," Ethan replied. "Different paths, same blood." The next morning, Eli woke Ethan early. "I need to show you something before I make any decisions about your proposal." They drove in Eli's battered pickup to a small rural school about 20 minutes away. As they pulled into the parking lot, Ethan saw a sign: Willow Bend Elementary, Special Education Equine Therapy Day. 4 of Eli's therapy horses were already there, brought earlier by volunteers. In the school's rear field, stations had been set up for different activities. Children with various disabilities were being introduced to the horses, some in wheelchairs, others with mobility aids, some showing signs of autism or Down syndrome. "We do this once a month," Eli explained, as they watched. "For kids who can't come to the ranch. Most rural schools around here have limited resources for special needs students. This program is the highlight of their month." Ethan observed as children who struggled with verbal communication began talking to the horses, as anxious kids grew calm while brushing a patient pony, as physically challenged students beamed with accomplishment when seated on a gentle mare. "The demand is 10 times what we can provide," Eli continued. "We're limited by resources, by the number of properly trained horses, by space at the ranch for more extensive programs." He turned to Ethan. "That's why I'm going to accept your proposal. Not for myself, not for the money, but for them, for what we could do with combined resources." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Partners, then." "Brothers first," Eli replied, extending his hand. "Partners second." Over the next 6 months, the merger of Thornfield Estate and Second Chance Ranch proceeded methodically. Legal teams sorted through the complexities of combining a centuries-old family trust with a small non-profit. Architects designed renovations to repurpose Thornfield's luxurious but underutilized spaces. Horse trainers began working with the thoroughbreds to assess their suitability for therapy work. The Lexington Society pages buzzed with the scandal. Howard Caldwell's secret twin, the dramatic reunion, the radical transformation of one of Kentucky's most prestigious estates. Board members resigned in protest, others enthusiastically embraced the new direction. Through it all, the twins remained focused on their vision. Midnight continued his mysterious comings and goings, but increasingly chose to remain on the combined property, as if satisfied with the reunion he had orchestrated. He never allowed himself to be stabled, but would sometimes accept an apple from Ethan or Eli's hand, a small concession to domesticity from a wild spirit. On a crisp October morning, exactly 7 months after Ethan had first discovered Martha's letter, they held the official opening of the Caldwell Sullivan Center for Equine Therapy. The event was attended by local officials, healthcare professionals, educators, and most importantly, families of children and veterans who would benefit from the expanded programs. As Ethan concluded his welcome speech, he gestured to the newly renovated main barn, where Eli waited with Penny and several other therapy horses. "My brother and I were separated by misguided human choices," he told the assembled crowd. "But we were reunited through a combination of truth, courage, and the mysterious workings of a very special horse." He nodded toward Midnight, who stood at the edge of the gathering, alert and watchful as always. Second chances aren't just something we talk about here. They're something we live. Whether you're a horse with a broken body, a person with a wounded spirit, or a family with a fractured history, healing is possible. Connection is possible. Wholeness is possible. As the ribbon was cut and visitors began exploring the new facility, a small girl in a wheelchair approached Midnight. Cautiously, the stallion, normally wary of strangers, lowered his head to her level, allowing her to stroke his nose. The child's laughter rang out, bright and clear in the autumn air. Beside Ethan, Eli smiled. "I think he approves." "He should," Ethan replied. "None of this would have happened without him." That evening, after the guests had departed and the day's excitement had settled, the twins walked to the hilltop where Midnight had first shown them the overview of both properties. Now, with fences removed and new paths connecting the lands, it was impossible to see where Thornfield ended and Second Chance began. In the gathering dusk, they reburied the two dolls, not in separate graves, but together in a small wooden box, the broken necklace now mended with strong cord. Alongside the dolls, they placed the faded photograph of themselves as infants and a deed to the combined property, officially registered in both their names. "Not a burial this time," Eli said as they covered the box with earth. "More like planting seeds for the future," Ethan agreed. As they tamped down the last of the soil, they heard the soft whicker of a horse. Midnight appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the evening sky. But this time, he wasn't alone. A small herd of horses, thoroughbreds from Thornfield and rescue horses from Second Chance Ranch, stood with him, integrated as naturally as the land beneath their hooves. The stallion reared once, a powerful silhouette against the darkening sky, before leading his adopted herd across the united property. No longer a solitary sentinel moving between two worlds, but the proud leader of a new, combined family. "Some things are meant to be whole," Eli said quietly. "Some separations are temporary," Ethan replied, "even when they last 33 years. As night fell over the Kentucky hills, lights came on in the therapy center, the renovated barns, and the housing units where families would soon stay while their children participated in extended programs. The Caldwell fortune, built over generations and nearly corrupted by one man's fear and greed, had found its true purpose. And the twins, once buried in secrets and lies, had found not just each other, but their shared calling, giving second chances to those who needed them most, guided by the wild spirit of a horse who had somehow known the way home all along. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan and Eli, along with the mysterious horse Midnight, touched your hearts. If you want to keep experiencing stories like this one, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share in the comments what moved you the most. Here, every story is a reminder that love can conquer even the deepest darkness, and that even the most deeply buried bonds can be rediscovered.